I remember a really good friend of mine when we were in our 20s. She was the first a friend of ours to have kids. She had, I think, a son at 27. But now, and 50 is not young, but it's not as old as you think it is when you're in your 20s. And she's like on Instagram, like in Paris this week. She's like, yeah, her kids are in college. She's done. She's done and has a lot more life left.
I'm Keltie McGuire, and you're listening to the Kids Are Childfree podcast. Hello and welcome to the Kids Are Childfree podcast. Today I'm speaking with one of my business friends and fellow expats here in Munich, Eleanor Mayrhofer. Now, Eleanor runs an agency of one providing online marketing, strategy, and websites to expat business owners in Germany. And while she was born and raised in Los Angeles, California, she has been in Munich for quite some time now. She moved here on a whim when she was 27 and just never ended up leaving. Eleanor married in her late 30s, and she had her first and only child at 44 after a long fertility journey. And today we talk about all the things motherhood, namely how Eleanor came to her own kids or child-free decision, what it was like becoming a mom a little bit later in life, how it was with this long fertility journey and how she managed to navigate that. We talk about being an expat and raising a child in a foreign country. And we also speak about how she manages the juggle of being a mom while also being her own boss. Hello, Eleanor. Thank you for being here today. Eleanor, I'm so excited that you have come on here to talk about your experience as a mom and your decision around having a child, because you are always someone in my life who tells it straight up like it is. And I so appreciate that honesty. And I really believe it's what people need to hear, whether they're on the fence, whether they're already a mom. We need more truth telling, if you will, about the ins and outs, the goods, the bads of life and this topic of parenting. So I'd love for you first just to briefly introduce yourself and then tell me about motherhood. And namely, I'm curious to know, when did you decide that you wanted to be a mom? What was that like for you?
Sure. Thanks for having me, Keltie. My name's Eleanor Mayrhofer. I'm originally from Los Angeles, California. That's where I was born and raised. And I studied design in San Francisco. And then on a whim, I moved to Munich, Germany to check it out and ended up staying here where I still am over 20 years. And I run a design agency of one doing website design and digital marketing for expat consultants here in Germany. And I had a child in at 44. I guess that's mid-40s. So your question was to when I made the decision.
Yeah. Did you always know you wanted to be a mom, or was that something? No. Okay.
No, that's why I think this is the perfect podcast for me. So I met my husband when I was 34. And I didn't have, there were phases where I thought I wanted kids, or it was just, something, sure, I want kids one day, I guess. Yeah, sure. And then I met my husband when I was 34. We got married. He's 2 years younger than me. We got married when I was 37. He was clear that he wanted a life partner, but he was on kids. And we were sort of,
okay.
He said, I can't imagine not having them, but I don't actively want them. And that is sort of how, I won't say I felt exactly the same, but basically before we got married, we talked about it. And I kind of said, we didn't make a decision we are not having children. But I remember saying to him, if it's just us hanging out, watching Netflix till we're old and gray, that's fine. I can do that. And when you get married on the other side of 35, I guess when you get married, regardless, it's just hanging in the air. When are you having kids? Especially when you're pushing 40. And, I don't think I had a clear, I wanted to enjoy the time that we had together. And I remember feeling that pressure, but also there's this unspoken pressure beyond your family of just everybody starts having kids. It just felt how, or maybe you don't, kind of one point in your 30s, suddenly everybody's getting married. And then one point later in your 30s, everybody's just having kids. And that started happening. And I remember just feeling kind of I'm not really ready yet. When you're 40, that's not great. And I don't think I ever made today I made the decision. I think around 41. I mean, it's like so laughable saying all this because it's like when you're like, what should I do at 41? It's sort of like, But I remember on my 40th birthday, somebody like one of my bonus moms, one of my stepmoms, gave me this little doll that her sister had given her that they sort of passed off like a little fertility doll if you're like trying to have kids. And she was like, only if you want it, only if you want it. And I was like, yeah, okay. And I kind of put it aside. And I guess it's when I sort of thought, I think we kind of said, okay, well, let's just, what do you call it? Start playing without a safety net or whatever.
Yeah. Call the goalie.
Yeah, exactly. That's it. I was like, I think I know the German, but not English, but yeah, or whatever. And nothing happened and nothing happened and nothing happened. And then more friends started having kids. And then I did start, frankly, panicking. And, but I would go back and forth. I would have moments of, a friend of mine had I think at 40, she had done 3 of these, what are called inseminations. It's like the lowest stakes fertility treatment you can do. It's like they kind of time your cycle and then they do like from your partner, they can like clean sperm, like make this sperm all spick and span and they inseminate you like at the perfect timing. And she got pregnant on her 3rd try of that. It's like not that expensive and fertility treatment terms. It was kind of low intervention. And I was like determined. I was like, I am not getting on that stupid fertility treatment insanity. I'm not doing that. So I was like, we'll do 3 of those. If it doesn't work, we're done. I'm like, not. And so we did 3 of those. They did not work. And I remember having this total feeling of liberation after the 3rd one. Like, we're done. I'm not doing this. And I think the problem is I kind of never really, like I'd be fine for a few months and then somebody would announce a pregnancy and then I'd be like, I'm actually kind of not fine. So I can't tell you there was just like a day where we decided. It was like more of a process.
It sounds like there was a lot of ambivalence for a long time and you sort of thought, okay, as I hear from a lot of people, well, let's see what happens. I'm theoretically would probably be okay either way, but it sounds like the more time went along, like, did you feel like as time went along, you felt more and more invested? And how much of it was disappointment that it wasn't working? And then how much of it was like, oh, actually, I do want to have a child. And like, this is painful not to have this succeed.
It was a mixture of both. And once you it's really hard for me not to use a gambling analogy. Like you're like, oh, I'm just going to go in and play the slots a little bit. And by the end, you're like a crazy person at the craps table cashing out your retirement.
Yeah.
It was a mix of both. I think what you don't expect, and this is like a common thing I learned later, is I think especially as a woman, you really experience intense feelings of failure. I mean, even the language is like achieving a pregnancy. Like, it's like, I can't achieve it. So there's like that feeling. There's disappointment in not doing it. There's just, not having a child. It's kind of like sunk cost fallacy too. It's just this, and the deeper you go, the harder it is to let go. I think that.
Yeah.
One of the things I think is difficult is that you can always try something new. And that, like, I kept thinking, like, if we were like in 1965, we would have just like closed up shop and been a childless couple and nobody would ask us about it. And that'd be that. But it's always like, there's a new procedure, there's a new technology, there's a new thing. You can always try something new. So it's very hard to just fight against that and say, we're done.
I've heard that from people in the childless community, and that there's sometimes this attitude of people who do decide, like, we're done. I've invested in as much as I can, emotionally, financially. It's taken as much of a toll as I'm going to allow this to take on my life, my relationship, et cetera. And yet then sometimes other people within that childless space who are, still trying to conceive, it's, well, you then chose not to. You've opted out. Like, you could have kept going. So it sounds like a really tough place to be in.
My feeling, and this was all going on, I would say 2013, 14. My daughter was born New Year's Day, 2017. So like that time frame, there weren't as many resources. I feel like there wasn't this podcast, there wasn't all this stuff I'm seeing now.
Yeah.
And my feeling was like, I was in some forums and stuff, but it was taboo to say, I'm throwing in the towel, guys. Like there was a mentality of never give up, because once you're kind of on that path, like the worst possible outcome is ending all this without a baby. And so I just felt like there wasn't a lot of I just remember at my fertility clinic, because I couldn't do it anymore. And I remember saying like, I need help. I have to get an off ramp. I'm going to, I remember, and they had a therapist that they worked with. And I remember telling her, I feel like doing one more fertility treatment feels like jumping off a cliff, but behind me is a pit of snakes. Like there's no, like I couldn't either. It all felt terrible.
So I'm curious, around this time, so you'd had these not sessions, 3 treatments, and 3 inseminations. What were things like in the conversation with your husband at that time? Like, what was he saying sort of alongside all this? Was he like, should we keep going? Like, did he feel invested as well in the same way as you, or what was that like?
Well, it was definitely me leading the charge. The difference was he felt like we should have like gone pedal to the metal right away, like full, because these were like no hormones, I don't know how much it cost. It was like under $1,000 a pop. And he was like, we should just go straight for IVF. We should just do the most. And I was like, no way. This shady industry, I'm not putting all that stuff in my body. Yeah, I was just kind of dead set against it. And I think this is the problem about decision making in this situation, that things do not get clarifying until you see nature is making a decision for you. You think until you really, really, really understand, I do not have an option here. That's when you get clarity. So it's kind of this weird thing of like realizing, and we had looked at other things. We had looked at becoming permanent placement foster parents. You also get a rude awakening, because the good thing and the bad thing, I mean, there's lots of bad things about, I feel like it's ridiculous to call it infertility at that age. Just kind of like you just waited too long, but is that you really have to think through what it means to be a parent and what it means to have a child. It's not like, well, this happens and oh, look, we have a baby. You're like really thinking like, why am I doing this? What is the point? Why are we here? You get into some deep philosophy pretty quick, but also you just kind of get a crash course in like having all of your assumptions obliterated, because a lot of people say, well, we'll just adopt. Like, let me tell you, no, you won't. It is very difficult to adopt. Most people do not give up their children for adoption. Most birth mothers don't want old people, like it's under 35. And there's even a movement, like an anti-adoption movement afoot now. There's like podcasts about that, like adoptees' rights and all this. Like you're not going to just roll into some office and they're going to have your baby. It does not work that way.
Yeah. It's the same with surrogacy, right? Like I'd never considered it, but a lot of people are saying like essentially women are like renting uteruses. And I mean, I'm not saying that you necessarily have to see things in that regard, but I agree. It's definitely not as complicated or as uncomplicated as people make it sound. And there's a lot of like ethical, philosophical, financial, logistical considerations to make. It's not just like, and people say that, well, if you're not sure and you can't have a baby, just go adopt. Well, and also let's talk about, I mean, you live here in Germany like I do, and things are much different here than they are in North America, let's say, when it comes to even, I understand like with certain fertility treatments and let's say being able to get a sperm donor and like embryos and all that, it's like way more complicated than it is.
Yeah, it's
elsewhere.
A bunch of things. First of all, also adoption, you are not allowed to do domestic adoption over 40. So they don't even allow you to do it.
As the Germans would say, period.
And I was like, what's this nonsense? And then they explained, they're like, look, for every domestic kid for adoption, there's 12 families in line. So you're not, even if we let you, you're not going to do it. And international adoption is like a whole other thing.
Yeah.
And then, for third party conception, I mean, we talked about that, like doing a donor egg. That is not allowed here. And I never questioned it because like everything goes back to the Third Reich and eugenics and whatever. But then my fertility doctor was like, why? Sperm donation is legal. She's like, we've got sperm coming out of our ears that nobody needs. And then I was like, oh, that's true. Why would one, why could you donate male gametes, but not female gametes? So what people end up doing is they just go to the Czech Republic or Spain.
Yeah, I've heard that.
Which is also, in my opinion, not great because then they're all anonymous. And then whatever children are born out of those donor conceptions might not have ready access to their genetic parents. And this is like another big movement. All these kids, it starts with like kids of lesbians in the 90s or growing up. And like they kind of knew the deal. But
Yeah.
because of DNA tests, all these kids are like, oh, haha. And then like, you're not my dad. Wait, what? Like they're finding out. So, and then they want to like find. So there are lots of complications and all of that stuff.
Yeah. And I think like just to interject here, it's not that we're not talking about this to freak people out who are on the fence and feel like they can't make a decision, because it does add another layer of complication. However, I do think that we need to like be aware and go in eyes wide open. It's like I was speaking on the recent episode with a fertility expert. Like we need to know what's up, because whether or not we like it, we can't avoid these like practicalities of what it means should we decide to have a child. And I think better to know, and we can't, of course, give advice with maybe a different scenario depending where you live in the world, but to be aware that like, regardless of where you are, I don't think any of this is as easy or straightforward as we can make it sound, and that there are considerations that you need to be seriously making if that's a route you think you might go down. So,
yeah, I mean, I wish somebody, I'm sure it's different now. There are a few books, but somebody just gave me also to help make the decision. There was one book, it was called Stirrup Queens, and it sort of went down all the options, but it was like I was getting a crash course in all this stuff while in like this emotional state.
Yeah.
Under what felt like intense time pressure, which wasn't exactly fun.
Okay. So you did these 3 treatments. Then what happened? Or like, did you decide to keep going, presumably, because you have a child?
They were pauses. There were pauses like, okay, we just can't deal with that because it's emotional. There was a thing we started calling decision fatigue. Like, you know, you kind of have to say, like, are we going to do this? Are we not going to do this? Let's just like not think about this for a while. Then I remember sorry, it's all kind of a blur now, but I had decided I had heard about this thing called natural cycle IVF, where there's no drugs. And there was this clinic that would do it. And just every month they track your cycle. They give you a little shot to like make sure your egg comes out or something. It was just like all the mechanics of IVF without the crazy drugs that make you like, grow 10 eggs in a cycle or whatever. And so I had made the appointment, and then we were back home, or we took a trip back to California. And I remember I visited my friend, a good friend of mine, who was a couple of years older than me. So I think she was like 45 at this time. And I admire her a lot because she actively wanted kids. She was living in the Pacific Northwest, and she was, dating, and she met a guy who was a great match for her. And he had a 13-year-old son, and he was really honest with her and said, look, I think maybe at the time they met, she was maybe early 40s. He said, I'm really not interested in starting another family at this point in my life. Yeah. So she had to make the call, and she had, been dating some duds. And she said, you know what? I'm going to hitch my lot with this guy and make my peace with it. And they have a great life. And see, this was the difference, because I visited her and she's like, I am telling you, it's fine. The difference was they are big time mountain bikers. They have a whole community of other mountain bikers, none of whom have kids. So they were already embedded in this community of people doing all this stuff. Like, and back in Munich, it was like you couldn't go 2 feet without getting hit by a baby stroller or a pregnant belly. And everybody we knew, I was like, I do not live with a bunch of child-free mountain bikers. And I really think that is makes a huge impact on your decision. Yeah. But after talking to her and seeing like her like living and thriving and happy, I remember driving down the Columbia River and being again like, we don't have to do this. We can just have an amazing life. We can live for ourselves. And it felt so clear, like, yes, we are done. And then we went down to my cousin's, and I don't know what happened to just being with family. I was just like a mess again. And I was like, I'm going to cancel that appointment. And then after that visit, I was like, I'm not canceling the appointment. It was this, it was that. For like ever, it felt like. But short story long, we did do the natural cycle IVF, and we did that for like a year. And I had like one chemical pregnancy. And I think I was like clinically nuts after that year. It was like every month doing that. And that was like really, really like further into the casino.
Yeah. The casino is such a good analogy, by the way. I really like that.
Yeah. Yeah. And so that's, kind of the more, and then, but somewhere at that point, sorry, I'm not so good at the chronology here. Just suffice it to say, it was like a series of starts and stops of just all the money, like the natural cycle IVF was I think like $1,000 a pop. So you got like, an extra $1,000 you're spending a month. It's not crazy, but it's not nothing. And, then you want to go on vacation. It was like you can't, it's just always in the background of your life. And it was very, very, and it was a huge emotional roller coaster of hope and crash, hope and crash.
I want to talk about the eventual arrival of your child, but I'm curious, you said something which I think, you asked a series of great questions really a few minutes ago. And you said it becomes a very sort of philosophical decision. Like, why do I want this? Why do you think you wanted to have a child? And I want to say so badly, but it's like I totally see the ambivalence, the flip-flopping back and forth. And I think it's something that a lot of people can relate to. But what do you think those big drivers were that kept you moving forward?
I have included is a totally not rational process. I cannot give you an answer that says, Keltie, the joy is unbounded. Like, no, I have no, my mother went, I didn't have a great relationship with my mother. I mean, I did at some points, but she came back into my life and she also had like a stroke at that time. So stuff. And that greatly impacted my feelings about it. Just kind of that. And I just realized one day, like, I cannot come up with, and that's what I kept trying to do. Like, what is my left brain reason of why I should say yes and do this? And finally, I just concluded, I want this. I don't have a rational reason for it, but it is a primal need. And that's all there is to it.
Yeah, this is so interesting what you say, because I feel the same way. And I've had people ask me, I remember a conversation Chris and I were having with a friend of ours a few months ago. And he was like, why don't you want a child? And I said, you know what? I can give you a lot of different reasons and you'll probably be able to counter all of them because, this is just what we do, of course. But I said, at the end of the day, I think they almost become like rationalization for something you just feel. Like, I can talk about the environment and how that plays an important role. And it's true. And that is part of the reason why I don't want to have children, my concern about climate change, et cetera. But if I really wanted to have a child, I mean, I drive a car, I get in a plane, and so I think for me, it's really, I don't want it. And there's these things that help, I don't want to say justify it, but like that make it sense, if that makes sense. Like, there's an emotional feeling and then there's things that make it make sense from like more logical side. And it sounds like it was similar for you. It's like there were things you were seeing around you, and maybe there were things like, okay, well, this piece about community and like feeling, I guess, perhaps on the outs, or that you were leading like a totally different life than a lot of the other people in your circle or here in Munich. But you wanted it. And like you say, it just became a primal need for you. And I think we don't have to justify that. I'm just curious for you if like, and you've answered my question, but if there was like a driver there that you were conscious of or aware of. And it was, I think it is an emotional decision, and that's what makes it so hard.
Yeah. I think the worst place to be is, well, at a certain point in your life, certain age, is ambivalent. I don't think, people, I think, like you're saying, none of us should have to feel like we have to give a official answer for our decision. It's just like, want to, don't want to. It's just very difficult when you're in this, like, I don't know, and really
super difficult.
Know.
Yeah. And I think we'll talk, I'm curious to talk to you a little bit later in our conversation about this idea that like it could have gone the other way and maybe what life could have looked like. But ultimately, through your various treatments, you ended up at 44, correct? Having a child. Tell me how that was and how it felt to finally have a baby.
It was amazing. It really, nothing more to say than that. And I think, everybody's experience is different, especially since it was so long hoped for. It was great. And I know other women who had the same experience and they had a really hard time with early motherhood. It's really hard to like make any kind of hard and fast claim about it. But I do think I know other women who really wanted children and then had a very hard time with it at the beginning because it is so overwhelming. But I wanted it. I was happy. I mean, look, it's a shock. It's a shock. I remember the first month, every day, there was like the opening credits of a movie, like day 15, day 70. I mean, it's such, and my husband and I, we were together 10 years and then we didn't think our last fertility treatment was going to work. It was kind of a moonshot. And so we were in the process of getting a dog. So we went from being like couple for 10 years to like having a dog, a child, and moving in 18 months. So it was like a real 180 in our lifestyle. But I will also say, I can't also decouple that from, I had a pretty easy baby. Also, socialism, yay. It's real, having in a place like Germany where there was a lot of support. You have a midwife come to your house as long as you want until you stop nursing. I went to moms groups. It was winter, but there was a lot of social. I moved to Munich when I was like 27. And so I had experienced the city like as a youngish adult, and kind of, as a child-free person. But I discovered a whole new side of it after having a kid. Like, all the playgrounds I had walked by before and not paid attention. I was like, this is amazing. And being able to get around. And yeah, it was, just the first year was great. Toddler, don't ever need to do that again. Like, 18 months to 4.5 was tough. You look back now and get sentimental, but people say it doesn't get easier, it just changes. But I will say for all of the listeners here, it gets easier.
Yeah. And how old is your child now?
He's going to be 7 New Year's Day.
Oh, wow. A New Year's baby. That must have been really extra exciting.
There were literally fireworks going off outside when she was born.
Were you the first in Munich? Did you get that award?
Some jerk in Harleching had a planned C-section at midnight, which otherwise she would have been the first.
Yeah. Very cool. So I'm interested, I guess just to talk about the fertility treatments just a little bit more here, and then we'll move things along. But for people who, either maybe recognize they need to pursue that, or that there's a good likelihood, perhaps based on their age or their health, et cetera, is there anything that you wish you knew then that you know now, or that maybe you would have liked to have been aware of going into that you can share?
I can't remember when the technology, I'm going to say this terrible, unromantic, very clinical thing. And if I could get in a time machine and tell it to myself, I know I would not listen to me. But if you are under 35 and you've got $5,000 laying around, you might want to think about freezing your eggs. Not because you're going to change your mind. I'm not going to say that to anybody. But the most horrible feeling is not having options. It's just good to have options, but that's very unromantic. And, especially if you're not partnered, oh no, it's all whatever. So I wish I don't know if there was anything about fertility treatments per se, just that they're pricey. But everybody knows that. It was more, I started analyzing every life decision I had made from my early 20s. Should I have dated that guy? Maybe I should. If the people are right, you should get married in your 20s. I just looking at everything, and it wasn't like that was a mistake. This was a mistake. And it wasn't like I should have geared my whole life towards having kids, but it was more just looking back at everything. How did I get to this point?
Yeah.
But not, I don't have a conclusion. It was I should have done X, Y, or Z. The only thing I could have thought was I should have frozen my eggs.
All right. So if you've listened to this episode for any period of time, you know that I am constantly encouraging you to leave a review. Leave a review. It certainly will help more people discover the Kids Are Child-Free podcast. And of course, it never hurts my ego as well when you say nice things about this podcast. But seriously, I want to invite you again to leave a rating and a review for the Kids Are Child-Free podcast. Now, the place to leave reviews with your words that talk about why you love this podcast is Apple Podcasts. And I said that I might share a couple of your reviews. And so today I'm going to share one of them. This one comes from Amelia, who is in the USA, and she says, a must listen, 5 out of 5 stars. I've been waiting for a podcast and resource on this topic for a while, and it's finally here. I was on the fence about having kids, and this podcast so far has helped validate my choice. Keltie is a great host, and I can't wait to hear more from all of the amazing guests. Thank you so much, Amelia. I really appreciate you leaving a review and for your kind words. Now, if you also want to leave a review, which again, please do. I will love you forever if you do so. Make sure you head to Apple Podcasts, give it us a 5-star rating, and then leave some kind words. Now, if you're not on Apple Podcasts, you can also go over to Spotify and easily leave your star rating there. And if you want to get bonus points from me, you can do it in both places. All right, that is all. We will get back to the episode now. You don't have anything to compare it against. And just to let listeners know, you have one child and you're, I think, 50 now, 51, that's it.
Yeah. Yeah.
Presumably.
Yeah. Oh God.
I don't want to make assumptions.
No, going into it. I was my ideal family structure was a husband, a child, and a cat. And I have a husband, a child, a dog.
Your poor dog.
But I love dogs. I didn't know I could love a dog so much. And yeah, so
it's kind of crazy. Isn't it?
I don't have the temperament for more than one child.
Yeah. Okay. So I think no one would disagree. You're an older mom for a child of 7. Would you say there's like perks to being an older mom, or are there downsides, or like, is it neutral? Do you have any feelings on that?
I think it's neutral. Everything's a trade-off. I mean, the one thing I do worry about is I do see friends that are adults and only children, and like the pressure they have to take care of their parents.
Yeah.
And we're going to be old when she's probably, I mean, we plan, God bless, who knows what's going to happen. But, I feel like we have to be really diligent about getting our affairs in order so she's not burdened with us.
Yeah.
So that's not great. But also if you live in a city, there are a lot of older parents. There are a lot of older parents with one kid. Like, I think if I lived in the countryside and everybody, I mean, having said that, most of our close friends now, because we have our friends our age and all their kids are teenagers. And then we have our friend circle now, and they're all about 10 years younger than us. But it's kind of cool because a kid is like the ultimate camouflage, because people just kind of assume you're roughly the same age. And I usually don't abuse them of that idea. But, I remember a really good friend of mine when we were in our 20s. She was the first one of ours, a friend of ours to have kids. She had, I think, a son at 27. But now, and 50 is not young, but it's not as old as you think it is when you're in your 20s. And she's like on Instagram, like in Paris this week. She's like, yeah, her kids are in college. She's done. She's done and has a lot more life left. And I always joke, like, you sure you're not missing a 6-year-old in your life right now? So everything's a trade-off.
Yeah. Well, and I think life in our 50s looks different than maybe it did when we were kids, because we had no idea what it was like. But I do think, I mean, you're a very healthy person. You're vibrant. You're cool. You're much hipper than I am. And it's, at least I think so. Yeah. 100% you can be a energetic, involved parent. It's not like, people talk about, you're not gonna be able to get down and crawl around on the floor. I mean, A, you have to want to do those things in the first place. And B, I mean, I think it depends who you are. And
I mean, all of our friends, everybody's tired. I mean, it's like, again, they're older now and it is easier. But in that beginning, it's like my friends that are like 10, 12 years, I'm like, they're getting their ass kicked too. Like, I didn't feel like, it's extra hard for us.
Interested about this having a single child. And the reason why is I think a lot of people, even the name of my brand, my podcast, Kids Are Childfree, we sort of think like, am I going to have kids, plural, or am I going to not have kids? And of course, there is an option for us to have for us to have a single child. And I'm interested, I mean, first of all, did you and or your husband, were there any concerns aside from the one you mentioned, which, frankly, you saying we want to have our affairs in order, we want to make sure there's like, hopefully not a huge amount of pressure on my daughter as we age to like have to care for us or worry about all the business and et cetera. Let's just say that's, I think, great parenting for anybody, even if they have like 6 children. I don't think we should be having kids with the assumption that they're going to be there, available, ready, willing to do all of those things that we may need. Of course, having that emotional support in the relationship is something that we hope we can have. But aside from that, were there concerns or reluctance, or do you have it? Or like, are you aware of like, okay, because of course there's these stereotypes, like having an only child, they're going to be spoiled, and having an only child, they're going to be lonely because they don't have siblings. And I see you wrinkling your face. Of course, they're just that. They're stereotypes. But what are your thoughts on that?
Well, I mean, we are kind of her tap dancing fools. She's like running the show. But I mean, and I do see like, that's why you have siblings, because you can't like hop to it every time they fart. Like you got to say like, too bad, kid, you got to figure it out. And you have to kind of train yourself to be like, not diving in and rescuing them all the time. And it also, so much is dependent on the kind of kid you get. Like, so ours, she would have loved to have siblings. I keep telling her like all the things she gets. I'm like, see, now if you had a brother or sister, you would not get this. You would not get this level of attention, but it doesn't register. But she's also very social. And so are we, which is good. I mean, I'm an introvert just in that I need time to step back, but my husband's very social. So we entertain a lot. We are out with friends all the time. There's a lot going on. And, I know if we were just like living a quiet life in the countryside and she didn't have like many playmates, it would be a bad scene. But it's pretty busy around here. And again, I mean, I have a bias where I like city living, but like another family just moved in and they have a girl roughly her age. They lived in the States for a long time. She came over on Sunday. Like when there's another kid, like we were just like doing our stuff because I mean, they need stuff for whatever. And I grew up kind of weirdly. I'm like, was raised an only child, but I have two younger sisters. One's 15 years younger and one's 7 years younger. And we actually all really like each other and have kind of become more of a cohesive family as adults. I'm a little mixed because I'm very glad I have them, but there's no guarantees. Siblings don't always like each other. Like you just kind of got to make the best decision you can at the time and not make it for these weird hypotheticals.
Yeah. Well, I'll say a couple of things. One is I heard recently, and I don't have the research myself, but that a lot of these assumptions we have about only children and what they're like and, how, I don't know, developed they are as people and all that. It's most of those assumptions, pretty much all of them are entirely wrong. They actually fare super, super well. And anyways, you can, if you're worried about this, you're thinking about having an only child, you can look that up. But I totally agree with you. And I mean, I think to have a child or children with the assumption that things are going to be a certain way, I think you said earlier on in our conversation, like any assumptions you have get blown out of the water. And like I have two siblings and our relationships both with one another and the three of us, it's like drastically varies. And I have friends who I've always thought it would be nice to have a sister and they have a sister and they're very different and it's a very challenging relationship. So I just, and I know only children who have relationships either with cousins or with, friends that are very sibling-like. So there's so many variables and factors that go into what those relationships look like and if they exist, et cetera. So
I think the bottom line is if there's any should in your decision, that's like your answer. Like a friend of mine, you should just kind of do what you feel naturally inclined to do. She's got 3 kids, 3 boys, and she's exactly the kind of person that should have 3 kids. And I mean, I love her, and I'm not saying this in any disparaging way. Their house is chaos. It's like wild times over there. And I would go nuts. I would be a horrible mother. I would hate my husband. I would be in a rage all the time. They are not. They're fun. They throw them in the car. They go camping. They do all this stuff. And as it should be. And that's who should have 3 kids, not me.
Yeah. I have to say, and maybe it's just because of the age I'm at and like how ambivalent and unsure I was about having kids, but I really identify with the idea of having an only child. And that was something that Chris was quite clear that if we did have kids, he didn't want to have an only child. And of course, as time went on, I was like, well, if we have kids, we're not having more than one at this point. But I think having a child versus having no child, that's obviously the biggest difference versus, let's say, 2, 3, 4, et cetera. However, I can see it being perhaps more complementary to my life and lifestyle to have one versus having multiple. I see a lot of only children that I know, friends' kids who are, getting to be 9, 10, 11 years old, like, and maybe specifically part of this is city living, but like they're very mature children. And I think kids should be kids, but I'm also surprised how grown up they are in a way that is quite at least nice for me as a grown up.
Yeah, they're usually more comfortable being around adults. I know I was
exactly.
As a kid.
Yeah.
But everything's a trade-off. I mean, when you have 2 or more, like they fight a lot, but they do kind of, we know friends where they like tell their kids on the weekend, you cannot come into our room before 9 in the morning. And you can't really do that with an only kid. They don't have anybody. So, and we're like on trips, like program directors, like, is not a vacation when you have an only child and no other families or kids around. You are like a program director.
Let's talk a little bit about business. Now you run, at least to Outward Eyes, a very successful business. I know you get great feedback from your clients. And you just seem like so organized and productive. And that impresses me just as on its own. Like, I'm like, wow, Eleanor is like large and in charge. But then there's the piece where you have a child and a dog. And so I'm curious, how do you manage that? And would you say that having a child is actually, I'm asking you this question because I've had a few moms mention it to me now. Would you say it's created like more focus for you and the ability to be more productive out of necessity?
Yeah.
Or is it just a hot mess?
No, there's always like the hot mess part. I think there's like a few things I'd say is that there's a project management term called Parkinson's Law, or it's a business principle. And that is that work expands to the time allotted. So if somebody says, you've got 2 weeks to get this done, you'll take 2 weeks. If somebody says you have 2 days, you'll get the same work done in 2 days because you have to. So there's that for sure. And I'm generally a pretty focused focused, organized person. The other thing is I really think it's also, I'm not a perfectionist. Like I'm just like done is better than perfect. I just get stuff out there and I'm not like freaking out about it. So,
yeah,
you know, I also use a lot of scheduling tools. So it's just easy to look like I'm everywhere all the time. And yeah, you kind of have to be focused. Also, my husband is extremely hands-on. You know, on Fridays he picks up, he's good. And it is easier with one, you know, we can go to the gym. One can it is easier. At least in the small years, I got to tell you. And it was very frustrating. I think I started this business, really started it in COVID, and then we had lockdown, and that radicalized me a little bit because when my husband and I met, I was senior to him. I was a bigger earner. And then I started my business and he became the breadwinner. And in COVID, it's like suddenly you're doing this nanny maid caretaker routine that I did not like at all. And so that was a big motivating force for me, you know, as she got older, as I got more childcare, and now she's in school, to just increasingly put my pedal foot to the metal.
It sounds like your business is not just for you then like something you do to earn money, but it's an important part of your identity outside of being a mom. And it's something that you want to nurture to something for yourself, if that makes sense.
Oh, 100%. 100%. My life would be so much easier. And I do not at all disparage this. And I don't mean this. If I wanted to have my main work be child rearing and home caring, which I do enjoy, my life would be a lot easier. Because I actually care about those things. So it's I want a nice home. I want to make dinner every night, but then I have this business on top of it that is equally important. So the stress kind of comes from me, but I couldn't not do anything that was not intellectually engaging.
Interested to hear. And I mean, you've been in Germany a really long time. It's funny because the other day I told someone I've been here almost 6 years and they're like, well, that's quite a while. And I just had to think about you, it's what, 25, 28 years?
Something like that. Yeah.
Yeah. It's going on a while. And so I'm interested, without having raised a child elsewhere, what is it like raising a child in a foreign country? Or is it just this is just it. I'm raising a child. I have no idea because I don't have anything to compare it against.
Well, I kind of have to go back to the policy things. My sister, she has he's I think going to be 3. And she's also a person who has a career that she enjoys and is very good at. And she had to realize how much of her salary goes to childcare, all that kind of stuff. So just not having the social support system here is really helpful. Also, you know, the school shootings, all that stuff. It's just, I am now the kind of person that says it's a great place to raise a kid. And going back there is just kind of a non-starter. So, and I meet with 2 of my oldest girlfriends and their kids are early teens and they've got all these college funds that they got to put into money. And it's yeah, don't have to worry about that. So all those types of things. And I just, I grew up in LA. You go around everywhere in the car. You always have, it's really kind of difficult now with the homeless situation, but you always have this kind of background of you could end up like that guy over there, or, it's much different than Bavaria. Let's put it that way. Even if you're growing up in a nice middle class life. So I just feel here is der Welt noch in Ordnung, as the Germans say. Everything's still in order here. She's in first grade, but they already they walk to school. They will on their own probably next year, but that's so romantic to me. That was only something people did in the 1950s, but you can still do it in a major city here and kids can be much more independent. So I am very glad to be raising her here.
I mean, I can only agree, not having children, but from what I see with my friends who have kids and just being a person living here, I mean, everything you say, it's quite incredible the amount of support they have for kids and families. And I mean, people are always going to argue it can be better. And I know there are certain areas maybe getting cut back, if you will. But yeah, it's impressive. And we can recommend Germany. I don't know if they're looking for more immigrants from the States. But
oh, they are.
Can you say that is there anything about, let's say, being American or how life is there that you kind of hope to instill in your daughter in terms of attitudes? I know here things can be a bit different, not always in a good sense as well. I mean,
you mean to be a friendly, open person?
Is that something you want to instill in her?
that. Yeah. We celebrate Thanksgiving and we go to the States. I am always reminding her of her Americanness, but I haven't thought about it as concretely yet because it's also her little personality is still emerging.
You're not like, you're a Democrat. This is like,
no, I really,
no political discussions yet.
All things like I am really trying to just be neutral on everything and let her come to her own conclusions about whatever. The one horrific thing that already happened is like, I think it's so great that we get to live here in a walkable city. And wasn't I clever for coming here and being able to stay? And I was like, okay, what do you want for Christmas? She's like, I want you guys to get a car. I was like, no, you don't understand how lucky you are. So, yeah.
Are you getting one?
No. My whole thing is like, I never want to live anywhere where I have to have a car. Like that's my big bugaboo, especially growing up in car culture.
Also big demands for a 7-year-old or almost 7-year-old. Yeah. Before we wrap things up, I am curious to hear what you love most about being a mom.
It is really amazing to watch a human being grow. I mean, it just never stops being amazing. I mean, that's such an overused word, but it is. And I have to say, I do like having a family. I like Friday nights when we're all home and the dog's, curled up at the sofa and I'm making dinner. I am a family person and I'm really glad I have my little family. It, there are also times when I'm like, I need to get away from all you people, but I just like having my little tribe.
I like the family feeling too. And the dog curled up on the sofa while I don't have a child. It's nice, right? And I think we come, especially as we get older, we come to appreciate these simple things so much more and just how nice it is just to be at peace and happy and just kind of chilling out. Okay, before we wrap up, I have 5 rapid fire questions I'm going to ask you. So the first couple are finish the sentence. Being a mom is?
Wonderful was the first line that came to my head. But also
and wonderful it is. Being a mom is not
terrible.
One thing, or I should say, what is one thing that you believe might make this decision a little bit easier for women who are on the fence?
Having a vision for your life in either scenario.
Yeah. And I just reminded myself, there's something I wanted to circle back to. You had said something to me when we talked about having this conversation. You said, and I'm paraphrasing here, so I'm going to allow you to, of course, correct me if I'm wrong. But you said something to the effect that, like, I don't know if I would have believed it at the time, but I think I would have been okay. And maybe even you said, I think I could have been happy if I didn't have a child. Do you think your life could have gone another way and that you would have been okay with this? Or does this feel like the ultimate right path for you?
I think I could have. I think the trick is you can't see it at the time. I mean, of course, it's easy to say that now, but I think I was talking about my neighbors downstairs. They're in their 60s, no kids. I think they met later in life. And they're like always entertaining. And I remember seeing them. And I remember having this thought, like, we would have been okay. I can see that now. I just couldn't in the thick of it.
What is one thing that you would like women who are child-free to know?
Like what I said before, freeze your eggs. It's such a dumb thing to say, but it is. If you can, it's just good to have options.
And last of all, if you could give one piece of advice to someone who's currently on the fence about whether or not to have kids, what would that advice be?
Well, I kind of just said it, but I think...
I promised 5 questions, so I should have done a quick pivot.
You know what? I think this would be it. I think whatever you decide or whichever way your life goes, there's kind of 2 parts to this. You've got to embrace it. You've got to embrace life as it comes. And if you did want to have children and you don't, you also have to take time to grieve. I know that sometimes it's like easier to say, well, I didn't want them or whatever, but I think you have to acknowledge that if you did want that and then move on and embrace your life as it is. Because the way I just feel is there's no right formula. There's no formula for happiness. Embracing your life as it is the only way to move forward.
All right. Before we wrap things up, I said to you at the beginning, I said, I want you to tell us about how people can connect and all these great things you have on offer. And you said, well, that doesn't really fit the bill. But I am sure there are people who could be prospective clients and who might be interested in some of the things you have to offer. Or maybe they just want to tell you they really appreciated this conversation and how candid and down to earth you are. So how can people connect with you? And of course, we'll link to that in the show notes. And then what do people need to know?
Okay. Well, if you want to know more about me and what I do, you can go to my website at eleanormayrhofer.com. My official services are Squarespace website design and also digital strategy. I work with, like I said, consultants or small 1 to 3 person businesses. I also have a podcast called the Germany Expat Business Show. So if there's any expats in Germany that are running businesses, hit me up. And I used to have a blog about Munich, and I'm now currently moving all that old content under the umbrella of my main site. So you'll find a little bit about life in Germany there too.
Very good. Should there be people who've now decided they want to have kids and they want to have them in Germany?
Yes.
You can immigrate here. All right. Thank you so much today for the conversation, Eleanor. It was really nice, finding out a little bit more about your motherhood story and life raising your daughter. And yeah, I hope you have a wonderful rest of your day.
Thanks. It was great. Thanks so much, Keltie.
Thank you for tuning into this episode of the Kids Are Child-Free podcast. Now, if you enjoyed that conversation, if you're feeling fired up or inspired, or you have all sorts of newfound clarity on your own kids or child-free decision, I want you to head over to Apple Podcasts and leave us a rating and review so that other people who are on the fence about whether to have kids or stay child-free can discover the Kids Are Child-Free podcast. Thank you so much in advance for doing so. I hope you have a beautiful day, and I will see you back here soon for another episode of the Kids Are Child-Free podcast.